I do think it's useful when we're in these moments of deciding to say, is this job taking me down the path to what I define as the good life? And psychologists say essentially there's two sort of big buckets that the good life falls into. One of them is happiness and contentment. So on a day-to-day basis, do you feel happy? Are the things that you're doing making you happy? The other one is meaning and purpose. And we all define that differently, but do we feel like we're living a life of meaning and purpose? Now, because most of us spend a lot, if not the majority of our waking hours at work, work plays a big role in our good life calculus. It's fairly recent, like in the last 10 or 15 years, psychologists have said there is a certain percentage of the population, let's say 10 or 15%, that defines the good life different than happiness and meaning. They define the good life as a life of excitement and adventure. And that's really what drives them. And so if you find yourself someone who's tempted to quit a lot of the time, you have this like wanderlust in you, it may just be part of like the life for you is the life of every 2 to 5 or 10 years, I'm going to switch careers. I'm going to take on a new venture. I'm going to do something different.
So I had noticed that I had about a 2 to maximum 3 year clock on any job. Then I got to entrepreneur, where I have now been for, this number will shock you because it shocked me, 10 years. I cannot believe I've been anywhere for 10 years. And so the question is, well, how? Now, part of the answer is that I have a cool title, editor-in-chief, and I have a lot of autonomy. And so it is a different kind of job. But I'll be honest, I think the real reason is because in many ways, I have quote unquote quit and reinvented. I've quit the previous version of myself and reinvented myself a number of times. So over these 10 years, I went from first just the guy who was focused on entrepreneur, and then the guy who was focused on entrepreneur and started to build some other things for myself outside of it. It's an entrepreneur, lives up to its name. It's encouraging of entrepreneurship. And over this time, I've started to start my own companies. I've started to travel around and give these keynote talks. I've reinvented myself from a media person to a person who sits on advisory boards, and who I just keep kind of changing who I am. But because I'm able to do that on the outside, I've been able to keep this base of this role for as long as I have. So I wonder what you make of that. I feel like in a way I'm kind of trying to do both things. I'm being mindful of what future opportunities get to be created here, and that's one version of the good life, but also I get to be adventurous and to experiment, which is definitely something that speaks to me.
Yeah, that's a pretty sweet spot that you're hitting right there, because it's between like the security of like you've been with them for 10 years, you sort of know this organization well, they know you, and there's just a certain sort of like predictability that comes along with that, being in a long-term relationship with another person or a company. But then having the autonomy to satisfy that, employment or organizational wanderlust that you have, or just this desire to reinvent yourself every few years is pretty critical. And I think part of that comes with naturally getting higher in the organizational chart, but also that's also has to do with the organizational culture. Are you a company that gives employees the autonomy to reinvent themselves, to dabble in side hustles, to do other sorts of things, to explore different versions of their self? And the research, there's been a lot of research on side hustles over the past 5 or 10 years. And it shows that, of course, if we go out and have positive experiences where we stretch ourselves in some new way, could be associated with work, or it could be something totally different. When we come back to work, we bring that positivity and those new skills with us, and that more creative thinking. It fuels better ideas. And so there's a win-win here for organizations that allow it. And so I do think, and this is something.
Actually, sorry, can I just interrupt you there? Because what you just said there is really critical. And I want to speak to all leaders of organizations right now, because I hear so often the same story, which is an entrepreneur tells me that they had started a side hustle while they were at a job, and then the boss made them choose, stay here and get rid of that side hustle, which is taking away your energy, or leave and you can go do whatever you want. And in each case, they say, you know what? Well, then I'm out of here. And they go build something amazing. And I think, what a stupid company, because you just chased away your most enthusiastic, creative, entrepreneurial talent. And you could have kept them and had them do amazing things for your organization while still building their own thing. They could have had the capacity for both. And in fact, their side hustles would have drawn more ideas and connections and energy into your organization, and you chase them away, and that is foolish, and I hear it all the time.
Yeah, it's this strange bit of, I don't know if it's territoriality or insecurity or just, old school thinking. But yeah, I mean, it's clear that, and this doesn't just go for side hustles. It has to do with like any positive activities for the most part that you have outside of work. But when it comes to side hustles, these are other, business related endeavors that you're engaging in. And of course, it's going to come back. And, the buzzword right now is reskilling. And organizations want people to reskill for AI and for all sorts of other reasons. Well, that's often what you're doing with a side hustle. You're developing this other muscle in your toolkit. And so, of course, it's going to benefit you, especially from a creativity standpoint when you're back in the organization.
So, we're talking about when to quit, and we're talking about that in the framework of a job, but there are plenty of moments in the life of an entrepreneur in which they've been building something. They've invested a lot of their own money. They've invested other people's money. There are maybe employees whose livelihoods depend upon the success of this organization, but they see the future and they are unsure whether or not this is a thing that's really going to work long term, or whether there's going to be an exit, or whether this is something that they want to keep doing, and they feel really stuck. And so I wonder what you could take from even maybe the world of thinking about quitting jobs, or just the research into quitting and these jolts, that you could help entrepreneurs orient themselves around that moment.
Yeah, no, I can definitely appreciate that feeling of stuckness, especially with the responsibility that comes with entrepreneurship and the commitments that you're often in, when you're in an entrepreneurial venture. And so, yeah, there's a couple of things to think through in terms of like, how stuck are you when you're in that moment? Because sometimes when people feel like, I'd like to quit, but I can't, that can create a lot of anxiety. And actually, there's not a whole lot of research, but there are anecdotes that just knowing that you have the ability to quit makes you less want to quit, right? Just knowing I could leave is enough. And so it's always good to check in and say, like, what is my level of stuckness in this role? And it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the first thing is, do I have alternatives to what I'm doing right now? And that could be from a financial standpoint, from a career standpoint. What other alternatives out there? Like, a lot of individuals get into entrepreneurship through leaving a more traditional role. A lot of the time, entrepreneurs at one point boomerang back into that role. They do the entrepreneurial venture and decide it's not for me, and go back. And so, is that an option for you? That's just one example. So you're always thinking about alternatives. If there's no alternatives, then you are in a bit more of a stuck position. The next one is switching costs. So if I was going to go do that alternative thing, if I was going to switch, get out of entrepreneurship and do something else, how much time, energy, cost would it take out of me? And then the third thing is one of my favorite terms. It was one of the first entrepreneurship papers that I ever came across in management, and it talked about psychic income, which you were talking about a little bit a second ago, I think. But it's just the happiness that you get from being your own boss. And really being honest with yourself about that, because for many people that happiness is pretty high, and it's what a lot of individuals who are in traditional jobs dream of. And so you got to be honest with yourself about how much you value that, because it can be something that you take for granted after a while. And so once you get an assessment of that stuckness, you can figure out, what are my options from here? And if you have many options, for alternatives and so forth, then you have more options for how to deal with these feelings that you're having. If you don't have many options, then resilience may be the only path forward. And it's best putting this out of mind for now while taking care of your own well-being, but charging ahead.